In today's episode, this is the third in our series on transactional analysis. We're not so much asking a question, but we are going through how we might apply TA to a coaching situation using an avatar, and we highlighted that. So Sarah, why don't you introduce us to our avatar?
Yeah, thanks, Gregor. So what we wanted to do here was sort of draw on our experience collectively and kind of create a fictional character, fictional kind of coachee that we might work with. And so let's introduce her. Her name is Alicia. She's a female. She's in her early 30s. She's a finance manager in a relatively small organisation, 1,500 people, something along those lines. And she's really well thought of, isn't she? We've had a brief from HR, and they've spoken about how highly regarded she is. But there is a specific issue that they are asking us to work with her on from a coaching perspective.
Yeah, she needs to be more visible, and she's not really, she's a little bit stuck, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I think, often when this comes up in organisations, it's where what I notice is where an individual will want to just kind of put their head down and work hard, and their quality of their work to speak for itself. So, it's one of those ways in which, it's almost as if I made this glass, I'd kind of hope that by sort of positioning it sort of at the front of the screen here, you'd see it and you might notice it and think, oh, what a lovely glass. Whereas actually what I probably need to be doing is going, hey, Gregor, look at this glass. I designed this. I came up with the concept, really drawing your attention to it.
Yeah. So she doesn't like blowing her own trumpet and any politics of any sort. She would call them politics, anything that might be thought of as self-promoting.
Yeah. I'm really deeply uncomfortable. The idea of elbows out and fighting her way through and kind of going, hey, look at me, would really not be something that she'd find very comfortable at all.
I think what HR have flagged is that she doesn't have much influence, and she needs more presence in meetings, so she struggles to make herself heard and say what she wants to say.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit introverted.
Yeah, and again, often when that happens, and I'll notice in my clients, that there's a nervousness, isn't there, about maybe I'm not going to get it right, or maybe someone else has got a better view on that than me, and so it kind of keeps them quiet. So this is our Alicia, and HR really want to promote her because she's highly regarded. She's a strong performer, but given the culture that she's in, she needs to be more visible. She needs to promote herself more. She needs to navigate the politics in that organisation so that she can really be hailed as a leader, and that's what she's coming to coach.
And I'm sure you'd agree, Sarah. I've had lots of clients like this. They hate politics. They want their workforce to speak for themselves, and they're getting stuck because they don't think they should have to do the other stuff. And they're a bit perfectionistic. They're worried that what if I get it wrong? I'm so busy, I don't have the time to be strategic. What if the others say if it's wrong? That sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and often very high standards. Which is why the quality of their work is so great. But because they have such high standards, they that kind of gets in the way, and they worry they're not going to be good enough. When actually their standards are so high already that they're already good enough, but they can't see them.
Right. So let's take it that we've contracted with her, we've started working with her, and we realise there's a bunch of stuff that can be done here. That there's loads of stuff that can be done with not TA. But the key thing is what we want to do is highlight what else TA can bring to the picture. And so we thought first of all we'd tackle this issue of confidence, especially about presenting. So she doesn't really have much confidence, but she really, really struggles about presenting, projecting herself in meetings, etc.
Yeah, and often the kind of thing I hear is, they're needing to present to senior people. As a female, it may be a room full of men, and feeling quite intimidated by that scenario, and then finding it hard to actually present or put themselves forward in the way that they want to, with that kind of gravitas and presence that maybe they would want to have.
Yeah, so in that situation, I would always start with the question, which is actually part of our coaching card pack. It's one of my favourites, which is this a full-time issue or a part-time issue?
Yeah.
And really, if it's full time, it's a deeper issue. It's about the confidence, but we'll come to that later. What we really want to talk about is when it's a part time issue. And what we realize is there's something that's triggering Alicia into this lack of confidence. Because when when she's not in those situations, she's extremely confident. When she really knows her stuff, she's an extremely confident person.
Yeah, yeah. And so when we explore that kind of part-time issue, what's the trigger? It's a beautiful opening to bring in some transactional analysis, isn't it?
Yeah, and what we talked about in our intro to TA, we talked about the parent adult child model,
Yeah,
which is relatively easy to explain to a client and then have them use it. We don't even need
yeah,
the OK Corral or anything else at this point. We're purely having this concept of rather than a transaction being between two people, but it being between ego states, and you can get triggered into one from another.
yeah. And I don't know about you, but one way I might come at this would be to say, so particularly if they're presenting maybe to one person, um, does that person remind you of anyone? Or it could be if it's a team of people. Does that setting remind you of any one or a historical memory that perhaps is being triggered here or being awoken?
Yeah. So as a coach, what we're helping them do is to become trigger aware. So we
Yeah,
may get them to journal on triggers. We may just in the conversation get them to talk about triggers. So where do they tend to lose their confidence? Is it a certain number of people? Is it a certain type of people? Is it a certain forum?
yeah,
So I think I was sharing with you the example of a finance director who was really, really confident, great presenter, but fell apart presenting to the top team. But it wasn't the number of people and it wasn't the forum, it was the presence of one specific director. And it was the quality of that director that triggered her. And that's when you might ask that question, well, do they remind you of someone?
yeah. It'd be really, really enlightening. So really what we're inviting the client to do then is to look at that kind of trigger, to use that language, with a different perspective. And we're encouraging them to really think about how they can manage their own state to get them to really intentionally move into that adult ego state, because that's within their control. They can take that deep breath, come into the here and
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
and
we want,
recognize that it's a different situation.
yeah, definitely we want them to be adult. And what we're making the assumption is, but essentially what happens in most of these situations are people are triggered into child. Their status is much reduced, um, and they are coming from a child position and from an I'm not okay, you're okay position. And that's why they'll lose all of their confidence because they're in a child position. So they have to be able to recognize that from what we call functional adult. You may not, you may actually be acting from child or acting from parent, but you recognize it from adult. That's what we
Yeah,
call functional adult. So once we
yeah.
know we've been triggered into child, we can then do something about that. And that's where more, like in the grow model, we would be exploring options, for example.
So shall we talk about if it's a full-time problem?
I just want to make the point that the parent hasn't necessarily consciously or deliberately triggered them to child from parent. It's just something that's happened. They're just going along thinking they're an adult. But if they remind our Alicia in this accent, in this instance, of someone who had been really dominant towards her and critical of her, she would be triggered into that child position. They may be deliberately doing it because they may be coming from persecutor position. They may be a bully.
It's
But
about
to
power
to
demonstrate.
recon,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So all we can do is help the client realize that all they can do is to control their state and what is within their power. Because I'm okay, you're okay, I'm okay with me, and I'm okay with you from them. They don't know where the parent person is coming from in this instance.
Yeah. And what I think is really, really quite beautiful about that is by changing my state, I can invite the other person to change their state too, even though they might not realize it.
Yeah. So there's lots of things that we can then do from other areas of coaching to help people stay an adult. We could do somatic work, because I know you, Sarah, you do an awful lot more somatic work than I do.
Yeah.
I do stuff from neuroscience more, in terms of thinking about the physicality of stuff and working with neuroscience. An actor told me this idea about the concept of status.
Yeah.
That's a really, really useful little tool that actors use, just thinking, well, that's persons at a status of 8. I can't influence them from a status of 2. So I need to be
Yeah.
at a status of 7. And how does my body language reflect what my status needs to be? And I can make all those decisions from adult.
Lovely. So what about if it's a full-time problem then? What do we mean by that?
Yeah, what happens if it's a full-time problem? So it's this would be a long time. They may have really perfectionistic tendencies. This is the whole point about, if you just work hard and keep your head down, you'll succeed.
Sorry, if I can just build on that idea, and often that is something that has been learnt, back then in the history, in the childhood, that has probably been a really successful strategy. I would describe it as a bit of a winning formula, right? So for whatever reason, Alicia, in her family of origin, learnt that if she worked hard, if she kept her head down, if she got the great grades, that would keep her safe. And I'm going to use the word safe. I don't mean that she's living in a violent home. I just mean that within her family of origin system, the beliefs, the values, what was rewarded, what was expected, meant that put her, in a situation where she felt okay. And so she's taken that winning formula with her through school, through university, into the workplace. And in many ways, it's continued to work really well for her until now.
Yeah, and Alicia's father in this instance was a professor at university.
Okay.
Had really high expectations. Her work had to be, he was the sort of guy that if she came back with a report card with 99% on it, he would say, what happened to the 1%?
Yeah.
He was that sort of character. So we've learnt that from our conversations with her. And so she's got a huge winning formula for her in her family system that isn't working for her in an organizational system.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think it's just important to clarify here for a moment that this isn't therapy that we're doing. So we've come across that information from Alicia just by some very gentle exploration that's set up very carefully, where it's optional. She gets to choose what, if anything, that she shares. And we're only really looking at it at that relatively surface level. We're not doing that deeper diving, deeper processing that you might do in a therapy session. She might choose to go and do that separately. But in terms of our work, it's an acknowledgement of how her history has shaped her, and that's being reflected in how she's showing up in her work environment.
So what I want to do here is explain the concept of contamination. So if you remember from our intro, you talked about parent, adult, child. You've got those 3 circles. Imagine if those circles start to move over one another. So if we've seen like a Venn diagram, you see where the 2 Venn diagrams go over each other. You get at this subsection, that's where the 2 areas cross over. What you're doing is you think this is your adult, but it's really coming from your parent. These are rules that you have learned, and you think that you own them, but actually they've come from your parent. You've swallowed them whole. Let me give you this example of contamination. My sister cooks her mince with a whole onion in. And my mother was watching her cook mince, and she went, why are you keeping the onion whole? Really confused. And she says, well, that's how you used to cook it. She says, no, you chop the onion up. I only used to do that because your father didn't like bits of onion in his mince. So she had just taken the accepted way of cooking mince was with a whole onion. She had contaminated her adult was from parent. She'd never thought about it before, but actually she could do anything with her onions. She could chop them up. Um, and that's the sort of thing that you don't think about. It's a very simple example, but it's a contamination from parent.
No, I like that. And essentially, it's a rule, isn't it? It's a rule by which I live my life that I have taken directly from my parent and unquestionably, is that a word? Yeah, unquestioningly absorb that into my way of living my life without ever pausing to think whether or not it works for me.
Yeah. So, for example, from outside of herself or outside of herself, parents, she may have heard things in her family system like nobody likes to show off. Children should be seen and not heard. You shouldn't blow your own trumpet. All the things that are rules that she thinks that she should be abiding by because that's what she learned as a child.
They may not have even been explicitly said, as in, children should be seen and not heard. It might just be intimated, so it could be more implicit, such as the behaviour of her parents, or the kind of the messages that she might have received. So that's something that she made up herself as well. Yes?
Oh yeah,
No?
she could have shown off. She could have shown off, and her mum and dad might have tutted and looked disapproving. You don't have to say it out. Quite often, what happens is these rules start really early on with non-verbal communications, but then they're supported later on by something else. That people will actually say things aloud.
And actually, if you've grown up thinking that it's not cool to show off, the idea of being in the spotlight, being visible, is probably going to be deeply uncomfortable, not only intellectually in your head, but actually your body will hold that, which is why we would do some somatic work. Actually intense feelings of anxiety, discomfort, possibly even, folding in, withdrawing, making herself small so that she doesn't draw attention to herself. So then also, the kind of thing that Alicia might share is a really distressing memory of being at school and having her work kind of held up in front of the class and maybe it being less than perfect. Or even, giving some kind of a performance on stage and feeling that she's being laughed at or ridiculed, or any kind of embarrassing moments. And you know what it's like growing up. I mean, it's just, there are so many awkward moments with friends or school or any kind of social setting where you're not quite sure if you fit in or you're not quite sure if you're, part of the crowd. Being visible, being obvious in some way, shape or form, and that being deeply, deeply uncomfortable, that memory lives in our body as well as in our head, which comes back to this sort of physical response that we can tend to have when we find ourselves in that situation again.
So all of those are good examples of contamination from child. And I'm sure you've had many a client say to you, I've had a client say to me, I remember the moment now. I remember when that teacher made an idiot of me, and I've never wanted to stand up in a room ever again since then. I've had more than one client say that to me.
Absolutely.
So technically, what we want to do is remove that contamination. Remove it from our adult. We can still believe, that essentially, children should be seen and not heard, but not for me in this adult sense. In an organization, we want to get that out. So there's lots of different approaches we might take. We might use rational emotive approaches, again, somatic, parts work. They're all accessible to us. But that's what we do as coaches to remove that cathexis. But all we're doing is we're using TA as a structure that the client can use to see to raise their awareness and again, increase their responsibility.
It's almost as if you put on a new pair of glasses and you see the world differently. You go, oh, right, now I understand where that's coming from, or, and it just really helps bring that clarity, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this is the sort of stuff where reframes are really useful. Meaning reframes, context reframes.
I think there's another reframe that I'd offer as well, which is when you've learned that it's a really successful strategy for you to stay small, to stay quiet, to work hard and kind of, hope the work speaks for itself. it's offering the possibility that actually that might have worked for you up until this point. You know, she's in her early 30s, but actually maybe it's not going to work for you in quite the same way going forward. And it's quite natural for that to be the case. You know, we evolve, we grow, we develop in our careers. And we've talked about this in previous podcasts, you know, leadership pipeline would be one example, but as we take on different responsibilities, there needs to be some shifts that occur, right? And so what we're not saying here is we're not saying, right, get rid of that strategy, push that one away. It's wrong. It's not right or wrong. It's an acknowledgement that, okay, that's there. And there may well still be some situations where that does work really well for you. But actually, let's be choiceful. Let's be intentional about when actually it's going to get in the way or it's going to trip you up. So one of the ways I like to describe this, again, come back to the glasses, is it's a way of having your patterns, your behavioural patterns, without them having you. So you go, oh yeah, there it is again. That's that thing. That's that pattern. I've talked about that with Greg in my coaching session, right? What I need to do is, as opposed to being blinded to it and then it getting in the way of Alicia actually achieving what she wants to achieve in her career and her life.
In that case, you would say, okay, when are the best times that you would still run that rule of I'm okay if I'm perfect? When do you really want it to be perfect? Well, it's really good here and it's really good there. Okay, so when are you going to change that rule to good enough? Well, when I'm presenting. When I have to answer a question and I don't know the answers. When there's I have to be able to deal with good enough. That's actually, this is one of those things that's deeply, deeply uncomfortable. Deeply uncomfortable. I've found with people with this driver, it's very, very strongly embedded, because they did learn it very young and it's very powerful. So it's deeply uncomfortable for them. So this isn't something that you just rush at. It takes a while to decontaminate this one, definitely.
Yeah, and it's a practice, isn't it? So you put it into practice. But the thing that came to my mind when you said that about when is my rule about being good enough? It's this idea that, Alicia, how are people going to promote you if they don't know about you? If they don't know that it's you that designed that glass, for example, how are they going to be able to give you that recognition? And by the way, it's okay to do that. It doesn't make you, arrogant. It doesn't make you a show off. Let's reframe that language. What might be a more useful way of thinking about what might be possible from that place of intentionally choosing when you're actually going to be more visible and be good enough, allow that rule to come in.
And that's why I like the feed forward process, because it's nothing to do with self-promotion. And we'll put a link in the show notes to the something about the feed forward process, so you know what we're talking about. We don't want to go through it. I think we've described it in another episode at some point. So hopefully you've really enjoyed that in terms of looking at Alicia as our first avatar and a really practical coaching scenario and how you might apply TA.
So thank you so much for taking the time for listening to our show. I hope you're really enjoying this new topic, transactional analysis. I'm really enjoying it, and particularly doing it with you, Gregor, because you are exceptionally knowledgeable on this. And as always, we appreciate feedback. Let us know what you think. And if there's anything in particular that you'd like us to explore, do get in touch. You can email us at info@thecoachingquestion.com. And please do give us a rating on iTunes. Molly seems to agree, she's barking in the background. Or your preferred podcasting or video platform, because it really does help us spread the word to a wider audience. Look out for our next episode. We look forward to speaking to you then.
Cheers, everyone. Bye now.